from the Netherlands. Hans is an independent international technology researcher, so we're all in very safe hands. So Hans, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So good morning from my side, and good afternoon, or good day, as you say in Australia. Indeed, I have a bit of a background in research for global companies such as Capgemini, Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and Gartner. And I'm happy to introduce in a moment Chris Burling, who's the head of strategy, customer digital technology, and Pedro Carrillo, who's the managing director of Phoenix DX. They will introduce themselves. So as an introduction to today's event, we have the following agenda. In a moment, I'll be trying to set the stage for the meeting. Then we'll dive into the benefits of working with low-code solution, and particularly the OutSystems low-code solution in an SAP environment. We'll share with you some stories, some lessons learned and successes. And we will also share with you a demo really showing hands-on how the OutSystems solution and platform performs in an SAP environment. And as Matthew said in the introduction, please interrupt, ask questions, use the chat functionality to ask questions. So as an introduction to the topic, I don't know if some of you have seen this, but my former colleagues in Gartner recently produced this research, where we'll share with you the link to this research, which basically says that in their estimate, the majority of technology products and services will be built by professionals outside of the IT department by 2024. In another earlier piece of research, Gartner claimed that by 2025, about 65% of application development will actually be on a low-code or no-code type of platform. So that is one of the inputs that is very important to take into account in the context of our meeting today. You know, if half of what it says here is true, then they claim 80%, as you can see. Then that is a major change to a lot of companies, particularly those companies that have built over time a tremendous legacy of different customized SAP environments. So that's one reason why this is an important topic. The other reason, obviously, is more or less depicted with this story, meant to be a joke. But nevertheless, in the Australian context, I had 2 tours during my career in Australia, so I know a bit about your culture, but also about your climate. To a lot of companies, the SAP estate that they have is big. It needs to be protected. It needs to be maintained, or in your particular case, it needs to be cooled because it's perishable in a sense. And it runs the company. It runs the firm. So you can't just shut it off, and you don't want to shut it off. On the other hand, we all have this experience that we want to speed up, and particularly the business wants to speed up. So this is the dilemma, right? You need to take care of this very important business continuity environment. And on the other hand, you want to be faster. And in some cases, some companies have concluded that we cannot wait for S/4HANA to be finished and to be ready. So we need that Lotus in front of my big ERP environment. I need it now, because in the end, I want to turn my ERP environment into a lean and clean environment. And on top of that, I want to have a Lotus type of capability in order to speed up. And that is actually what we're trying to share with you today. So using this metaphor as a starting point, I would like to hand over now to Pedro to say a few words about the current situation in Australia when it comes to ERP modernization, specifically SAP ERP modernization in relationship to OutSystems. Pedro, over to you.
Thank you so much, Hans. Pleasure seeing everyone here. And just as means of a background, I'm from Europe, Portugal originally, and I've actually been doing OutSystems and SAP for the past 15 years. I was fortunate to build the first SAP connector for OutSystems back in the days, and was exposed to a lot of European companies that were implementing already 15 years ago OutSystems and SAP as a companion. So very happy to bring a few of those learnings. When you look into some retailers and organizations like overseas, like Jerónimo Martins, they have about 4,000 stores, 4 times more than Woolies has here in Australia, and about half of their revenue overall. And they've been producing about 20 new applications a year and connecting POSs with smart stores and driving a layer of innovation on top of SAP whilst still keeping what's core in SAP. You see organizations like Certis here in Australia and in APAC that have exposed the whole SAP data model through OData and through APIs, and again leverage the right tool for the job by perhaps customizing the security guard's experience and the customer's experience in a layer that is built to change. And so today we're going to talk to you a lot about some of those examples. We're going to hear from Chris Burling on GPT and how these technologies have been partnering very strategically and hand in hand. But you might be wondering what is OutSystems if you haven't heard of it before. And so OutSystems is an enterprise platform for custom software development. It's a full stack environment where you can build your data model, business processes, complex business rules and user interfaces, pixel perfect user interfaces, I might say. It's fully integrated with SAP, and they've been companions, as I said, for the last 15 years, perhaps one of the oldest companions on OutSystems on the low-code segment. And the ability to extend and connect and orchestrate SAP and non-SAP systems is part of the DNA of the platform. If you want to embed applications inside of the system landscape of SAP, for example, you can do that. And it's a visual environment that allows people to build a number of applications. I'll talk about that in a moment. And it's not just build them, it's maintain them, evolve them. So OutSystems offers a continuous integration, continuous development, and monitoring capability that allows organizations to deliver applications at scale and speed. So the outcomes that you can build with this typically focus on experience layer. We're going to hear a bit from Chris around how they focus on that last mile of the user experience and connect the dots between different systems in seamless interfaces and native mobile apps that might require offline. With OutSystems, people build full core engines also. So there's been a number of insurance companies building their portals, building their enterprise and channels supported by OutSystems, doing campaigns management and so forth. And there's a lot of operational systems, incident management, field services type of scenarios that are built and leveraged with this platform. Again, great companion with SAP, and I'm just very keen on introducing you Chris Burling, who's going to talk about some particular use cases. Over to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me today. My name is Chris Burling. I'm the Head of Strategy, Customer and Digital Technology at GPT. My background is actually in architecture and program delivery, so that might give you some insight into the way I look at OutSystems and the story at GPT. I guess before I get into the story about OutSystems at GPT, it's probably worth just giving you some context. Our technology environment is what we call a best of breed landscape. And so what that means is that we have market-leading applications fulfilling each of our core capability requirements. And this has benefited GPT in giving us a great deal of agility in delivering new solutions, and also being able to manage the life cycle of our applications without having to look at the whole technology environment. What we found, though, over time, as the trend of digitization and digital increases, I guess what we see is that it doesn't create the best experience for the end users, because the reality of business processes is that they tend to cross different platforms. And so this led us to reconsider our application strategy. And this actually also coincided with us looking at replacing a legacy SAP application, which was built in personas, which had reached end of life. And so it was around this time that we started doing research into the low-code market and considering what our options were. For us, because we had that best-of-breed technology environment, we didn't feel that Fiori was our best choice. We felt the need to integrate and orchestrate across multiple applications. And so that led us to look for more of an independent technology solution. And so in doing some research, we found quickly that OutSystems was a market-leading platform through the Gartner research, as well as feedback from other research organizations. And really decided to jump into that. And the reason that we wanted to do that was because we had an opportunity in a project that was in flight. So we set out with a trial, and OutSystems put us in touch with Phoenix, who were able to help us deliver a POC quite quickly. We completed that in 1 week. Now that POC included a mobile application as well as integration to SAP using an SAP connector. Pretty impressive from our point of view that we could deliver that and show that to our stakeholders. In terms of suitability of low code for GPT, we did consider some of the concerns that you might have around building custom software. We felt that low code mitigated some of those risks in an easy ability to support and maintain. And we also considered our own maturity around software development, which is why we were partnering with Phoenix. Okay. So after the trial, we delivered our first project with Phoenix, and the app was built in 4 weeks. And this was a use case example where we were orchestrating and integrating across multiple platforms. So the application took a project request out of Anaplan, our forecasting tool. It sent it to an approver who could action that quickly. And the business outcome for us was that we were commencing our projects, reducing the time frame from 3 days to half an hour. It's a fairly simple use case to start off with. I've got a few more which I'll come to next. Just to give you an understanding of how OutSystems fits into our architecture, we've as I've described earlier, we have our best-of-breed landscape of applications. That's represented in the bottom layer of cylinders. What we have also invested in over the last few years is what we call our digital business platform environment, which is the API enablement of our applications and an orchestration layer, including AWS and microservices. So, and that strategy came before our OutSystems strategy. So what we were missing was that unified, consistent experience for our end users. And so the use of OutSystems at GPT is very deliberate in the presentation user experience layer for us. It enables us to deliver applications that have consistent experience for our end users, and that covers 3 kind of user areas, so our employees, our customers, and our suppliers. Lastly, just some further use cases at GPT, and really some examples of where you might find benefits in using OutSystems. So the first one is being able to solve problems fast. Last year, as we went into lockdown, our real estate industry was impacted by having to offer relief to our tenants. This was legislated, so our business had to respond very quickly and had initially set out to do this manually. We could see a lot of issues with that in the technology team. So we came to the table and offered a solution to enable negotiation as well as straight through processing of any changes to rent. The second tile in there is it's referring to iBuy2. That's the personas replacement application. So this is very heavily integrated with SAP and is used for purchase orders and service receipting in accounts payable. And the business benefit here was an experience one for our employees. So our employees were very happy with the new application, and it basically made their lives easier, removing roadblocks from their daily work. And then lastly, we do have productivity benefits as well. So I've already spoken about the CapEx application, but the one which is referred to there as Condo, that's a front end for our billing system. So the billing's done in SAP. Previously, we used to have a manual process to review the billing for our tenants, and that's now been presented in an application that enables our building managers to very quickly look at that and approve that, reducing the time frame for that from days down to hours. So they're the examples that we've seen so far, and we see obviously further examples. We've mostly focused on employees so far, but we are certainly looking at strategy around our customer as well. So thank you very much. Thanks, Hans.
No, thank you, Chris. It's a great example. So before going to the next case, which I want to share with you, is there any questions from the audience to Chris about this particular case? Use the chat or indicate that you would like to have a follow-up question here. Feel free to do so. Whilst we're waiting for that, Chris, just one question. So one of the claims of the use of OutSystems as a platform and really industrializing it is that it increases productivity. Can you reflect a bit on your experience in that space?
Yeah. So from a developer point of view, anecdotally, I understand it does improve productivity in the development process. What we've actually observed, GPT, is more on the end user productivity side. So where you can enable a process to become self-service through a digital solution, we're seeing productivity benefits that I mean, we'll often look at automation as a productivity style solution. If we add self-service on top of that, we see our productivity gains double.
Yeah. And that is what, to a degree, the platform enables you to do.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't see any additional questions so far. So let me just take
there was
you to
one here from Uppet. So the question was, how easy was integration? That's a great question, because I've got answers that range from very easy to quite difficult. And if you're in a position where you can use a connector, then you're in luck, because that's going to be a very quick experience for you. Where we found it to be more challenging is if you're developing APIs on your applications. So you have to take you have to factor in that extra effort.
Yeah, that's a good point. The platform comes with, if I remember correctly, 2,000 connectors. But definitely there is instances, and since there's different companies represented with different legacy environments, it can be challenging if you have to build them specifically for your needs. But in the SAP space, that is definitely not the case. So thanks for that. Let me just take you to the next case, shortly presenting it to you. So what we're talking about here is one of the biggest beverage companies in the world, which includes, by the way, a big beer brand. We're not allowed to use the company name, but they did allow me to share this particular case. And the case is all about business finance transformation. So to give you a bit of a feel, this is a global beverage company that operates in 25 countries across the world, and over time built a total of 20 instances of SAP, which were all heavily customized for specific regions in the world. And as a result, now that they obviously, as I'm sure all of you are in the process of considering how to move to S/4HANA, in what way to move to S/4HANA, they use this opportunity to decide that what they want to move towards is a clean ERP environment in the SAP S/4HANA new stack. And that on top of that, around it, they want to have a number of platforms for which the OutSystems platforms is one of the major platforms for them to use. So for the purpose of anonymity, we called it WorkFin. And you see some of the stats there. It's one standard interaction tools for workflows across the world. It encompasses 26 countries. And at the moment, it's used by some 8,000 users, both on the finance side as well as on the business side. On On the features, you see some of the typical characteristics that were built into the OutSystems solution that is connected to these 20 instances of SAP. Standardized forms and platforms in finance, very important. Integrated vendor and customer data. Data insights from any dimension. Real-time insights, very important. And also very obvious, particularly in a finance environment, all data, documents, approvals, communication, recording, and single finance requests are stored in one place, creating one single version of the truth. Now, one of the major reasons for this company to invest heavily in this space is because they want to automate a lot of these functions because they're very human intensive. And that's why I started out by saying this is all about finance transformation and at the end of the day, business transformation. The whole purpose being that any type of financial information that's relevant to a particular role should be available easily in a mobile function, whether it's approvals or queries. So that's sort of more or less what their goals is. And to give you a bit of a feel of how that plays out, it's much more than just a workflow tool. Obviously, that's what it is. But what is very important, because of the nature of the platform, it allows them to address basic finance functions and inject into that large degrees of automation. So to give you an example, general ledger postings, 30% of the total GL postings requests are currently automated. That's huge in a company of this size. As I said, 26 countries, 8,000 users. Invoice status, already 10% has been automated in that space. In less than 1 minute, the requester receives a response instead of hours, in some cases days in the past. Sundry invoices, in other words, third parties from the outside that want to have their bills paid. 11% are fully automated. Validation happens in real time. A full integration with email exchange. So when you build a particular case about a certain payment and there's some dispute about the payment, there's email exchange. In the past, that should be completely separate. And so you lost track of where we are and how we settled the account and so forth. The integration with email makes sure that there's one single version of the truth that includes the interaction with the client or the supplier. And very important, obviously, in the SAP world is master data confirmation, which in their case is particularly important because one of their shared service centers on the finance side is in Poland, and they want to have a total visibility of what's going on, and particularly on the master data management side. So it's an example, a second example that we wanted to share with you of a company that has a huge investment in SAP, 20 instances. They definitely want to keep SAP, so it's not a question of replacing SAP, but they want to use S/4HANA and the move to S/4HANA not just as a, let's call it, technical migration, but they definitely want to use it to transform the finance function itself and to create a user-friendly, fast platform to deploy functionality easily and particularly in a mobile environment. Now, to illustrate, going back to Chris's earlier point, that this is not just applied to in a finance environment. Another example of this same company of the use of OutSystems was actually when COVID hit. You can imagine when you sell beers and sodas to hotels and to restaurants, you're hit heavily in 25 countries. And so they used OutSystems from the marketing department to create within 3 weeks an app environment in which any hotel or restaurant in the world that wants to change their business to a delivery model, as I'm sure you've had in Australia and still have, as we had here. So the restaurant is closed, but you can still go to a website, order for food. They offered that to their clients for free. And the only additional request was you need to incorporate into your product portfolio or into your products a product from this particular beverage company. And the OutSystems platform is so easily usable that any restaurant or hotel in the world was able to use this and create their own website using the beverage company's backbone in the OutSystems environment, because OutSystems is multi-tenant, meaning to say that every hotel or restaurant can create their own website with their own product portfolio and so forth. So it's a typical example of another added value of an OutSystems solution, which is speed to market and your ability to agile respond to changes in the market and disruptions that you need to respond to. So these are two different examples from different industries, from different sizes of companies, but illustrating the same thing. So I could imagine that what is a relevant question to ask to you, Pedro, is if I am in this audience, I have a substantial SAP estate in which we invested for a long time, which is customized to a large degree, which scares the hell out of me if I want to bring all of that to S/4HANA, and I'm even having problems explaining the business case, how to do that. Where would you start? Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you so much, Hans, and that's a great question. I think the words you used, the lean and clean SAP instance, might not be a reality for everyone in this webinar. There's different levels of journeys, of course, with SAP, and I've been fortunate to see companies with these joint journeys for more than 10 years. So the enterprise fit and the roles that OutSystems plays, I think they're very important. And today I want to talk about three. Before I hand over to Richard for you to see it in action, we're going to show you in action how this works. The first use case, like Hans mentioned, is how can we try to choose the right platform for the right needs. And the anecdotal comment that ABAP has 38 years of existence and perhaps hasn't evolved at the same rhythm as every other technology has, is something we in technology have to deal with. The fast pace of technologies evolving. And so if we can find a role to bulletproof and the investment for the future by choosing a platform that can keep up with the evolving needs of the technology, why not consider it? So I'll talk about Replatform. We heard a bit from Chris talking about orchestration and connecting SAP and non-SAP systems, and so we'll talk about that too, as well as building some custom applications, processes on top of it. Now, where to start? And if we go a bit deeper on the replatforming, the word here, in my view, is could we have a layer that is built to change, that tightly integrates with SAP and allows us to have a lower total cost of ownership, less maintenance costs, faster time to market on that, still leveraging all the capability and the power of the ERP and the additional modules that SAP has, of course, acquired over the years and their enterprise product base. So normally what we see is organizations with an intent, with a driver direction to keep their competitive differentiators, in finding unique business processes that might be a differentiation for themselves, looking for alternatives on top of SAP. There's customers who try to reduce the amount of customization on the amount of ZBAPs and other specific developments on top of it by, again, putting them in a specific layer. And of course, if there is need to reuse any modules that already exist, that's the best way. So we heard from Chris the replatforming example of personas. SAP has a number of UI layers. Some of them became outdated over the years. There's many organizations with many custom processes and customizations on top of it. If there is a migration for SAP for HANA in the near future, could we have a more effective way of improving that user experience and keeping the core? So that's the first type of positioning. The second type of use case we see in most organizations is what also Hans mentioned around connecting and gluing different systems. And so OutSystems comes with those 2,000 plus connectors, consumes OData services, also BAPIs and ZBAPIs connections, depending on what we're leveraging. You can leverage the SAP security model through the OData services that are exposed from SAP in the new versions. And so we already have a very tight connection with SAP. at the same time, we can also integrate with other systems or complement, tools like MuleSoft or other integration tools that the large enterprise organizations might have.
Maybe that is a really important part. Just sorry to interrupt you, but this is really important part, which we would like to take offline for those of you that want to, right? So whether it's TIBCO or Boomi, there's different solutions to do this, and these are tailored to each of you. Maybe it's important to mention that as well, right?
Absolutely. It's a case-by-case basis. In the case of GPT, there's a digital business platform there that has a number of other APIs, an API broker. Different organizations have different needs. The flexibility of OutSystems is indeed that adaptability and orchestration that it can bring on top of it. And perhaps the last use case that we see in the enterprise fit is the building of those custom systems, and perhaps in a mobility scenario, the need to have offline, and if you are, for example, in a store and you need to raise a purchase order, having a unified way of doing that without jumping between many SAP systems. And that was what Chris was alluding to before with the example of iBuy. And so the creation of custom software, just because you can doesn't mean you should. No, obviously we want to leverage as much as possible from the package that you already have. Normally the order is you have the package, you want to reuse components, but if you can't find something unique for your specific use case, build with it. And building with OutSystems brings a number of advantages because of the speed, the skills reduction that you need. You can do basically more with less. It's a platform that is all geared for 10 times productivity. That's the thing that OutSystems has been doing for 20 years that very few others have in the market, is always trying to bring 10 times productivity to developers. And when you combine that with the ability to connect SAP and Anaplan, SuccessFactors, many other tools, with the pixel perfect capability of building apps, you start to build a layer of custom software application on top of SAP with OutSystems that allows organizations to react very fast to their business demands and business needs. That's all I wanted to share, Hans, and I would like us now to hear from Richard, I think, to see it actually in practice.
Yes, the taste of the pudding. Richard, the floor is yours. Show us the goods.
Camera off and my screen will go on.
Perfect.
All right, just about to start sharing. And for the demonstration today, what I'm going to show you is two main things. One is an existing application that integrates into SAP, and then I'm going to take you through the steps of how we could build an SAP integration-based application. So this is an order management system. So when I log in as a sample user, I land on a dashboard page. What's probably of interest to those who are more from an architecture background is what the application is made up of, the main components. Obviously, we've got SAP as part of it. We have another large core system, which is Salesforce CRM. A few other things I'd like to highlight here. The smaller rectangles that are inside the red box, which includes everything built in OutSystems, represents large components in the data layer. For the data layer, this can serve a couple of purposes within an OutSystems application. One is it can be a synchronization point for domain entities that are common between multiple backend systems to help synchronize them. So for example, both SAP and Salesforce share a concept of a customer, and we need to synchronize data between them. They can also hold customisations. So rather than going and customizing the data model in the core system, that can also be held in that layer. Across the top, we have an order creation approval process that I'll show you in a second. And if you just have a look at some of the metrics down the bottom, this is a moderate size application, about 40 screens and 30 tables, built in 1 month by one developer, which is typical of OutSystems. I'll just quickly show you what the order screen has in it. I could go into an order. Now, this will initially be sourced from a system like Salesforce in this case. It has rules associated with it. So for example, these have been implemented in OutSystems to ensure that we can only submit a valid order. And when I correct the order so that it meets the rules, it's then passed through a process. So this is the actual order process, which is in flight currently. And if we have a look at the back-end development environment here, so now what we've done is we've switched across to the OutSystems development tool. I'm actually currently looking at the process layer here, and this is exactly what you saw on the screen in the actual app. We've surfaced the process. You can see that, in fact, sending this to SAP, this order to SAP, is in this case the very last step of this process. The process has other integration points, decision points. It can pop up screens for different roles within the application. The other thing I'd like to show you under the covers here is a little bit of the integration that was done in this application. So in this case, both Pedro and Hans mentioned there are a lot of integration options. You may already have an integration layer, but I'm going to focus primarily on the integration options that come out of the box with OutSystems. So in this case, we've used BAPI-based integration. We've configured the connection through to SAP here. I'm just going to test it's still working. Yep, that's great. And we've gone and already defined a number of BAPIs here. If I wanted to use another BAPI, I say I want to use a new remote function. I can see my catalog come up here. And I can, for instance, search for the BAPI that I want to connect to. And when I load it up, I'll see the description of the input and output parameters. Once I've actually got the BAPI, what I would then typically go and do is go and build out a business layer function for this BAPI. So for example, if I were to create a customer, I can create what we call an action, which is like a function, which sets up the constants, maybe does some validation, calls the BAPI, and then returns the customer ID or raises an exception if there's been a problem. What I'll show you next is how we can actually build something from the ground up. And to do that, what I'm actually going to do first is the integration into SAP. So I'm going to connect through to my OutSystems environment first, using a tool called Integration Builder. And Integration Builder helps me build out some of the integrations into larger systems where the integration flows and the entity models are quite complex. So I'll create a new integration. And in this case, we're obviously creating an SAP connection, in this case, using the OData interface. The first thing I need to do is I need to upload the specification that I'm going to use to connect to. So if I go across to the SAP API Business Hub, I'm going to search for the specification that I want, which is going to be my business partner specification. Here's the API. And what I need to do is download that specification document from there. So once I've downloaded it, I can see it over here. I'm going to go back to Integration Builder and I just drag this across. And Integration Builder will validate that file to make sure everything's okay with it. And then I move on to my next step, which is browsing for the entities within that API that I want to connect to. And in this case, I'm just going to, for example, use the customer. I can then go and review my connection. Now I need to change my URL, so I'm actually going to use the sandbox URL in this case, which SAP provides me. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in here. And now I'm going to publish this. So what publishing means is this is going to create some integration assets within my OutSystems environment that I can then use to build an application. There's still one last step here, which is connecting into my SAP instance. Because this step takes a couple of minutes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch across to my development environment, start building my application, then come back and complete those steps so we don't just sit here for a couple of minutes watching it churn around. So in OutSystems, in order to create an application, I click this button here. And I'm going to start by creating an application from scratch. And the first application I'll create is a web application. And I'm going to call this SAP demo. I'm going to give it the icon and the color scheme, and then create the application. All of my assets are going to go into a single module, but as we build more functionality, this is typically done across multiple modules. Now, the way I'm going to actually do this integration with my current environment is, rather than just doing a direct API call, which I could do, I'm actually going to synchronize this data into a local object. So I'm going to create a customer entity inside OutSystems, and I'm going to create a couple of fields in it, which happen to match those that are in the API return object that I'm going to access. And I'm also going to set this entity to read only but public within my environment, so that I can access it from other applications within OutSystems. I'm also going to create an action to synchronize my SAP data into that entity. Now, let me just switch back across to see how my my integration is going. So it looks like it's been published now. The last step I need to do is to connect it to the SAP instance. So I'm redirected to my integration step, and I need to select a connection. I don't have one at the moment, so I'm going to create a new connection. So I could use basic auth. In this case, though, because I'm using the sandbox, I'm going to use the sandbox API. So all I need to do is get the API key and copy that and go and provide that here. I'm just going to test that connection. That's great, it's working. I'm going to create the connection, and then finally we will then just finish off this so that it links up my integration and tells it to use that integration. I can see here, this is the actual module that I need to use in order to consume that integration. So swapping back into my environment here on my synchronization step, I bring up my list of dependencies that have been created in the environment. And that's the one that was created just there, the SAP Business Partner integration. As you can see, I selected the customer object, so that's what actually is going to be exposed. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the search customer. Now, with search customer, if I don't provide any parameters, it's just going to return all of the customers to me in the integration. What am I going to do with that? Well, I'm going to take advantage of some of the AI features of OutSystems to help me actually build the logic here. So first of all, I'm actually going to loop around, excuse me, just hit a key accidentally there. I'm going to actually loop around the response object that I get back from OutSystems, and I need to store the data into a variable which represents my customer. In other words, my customer record in the database. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to, for each record that I get back from SAP, I'm going to load that into that customer variable. So I'm going to say, choose the return value, the response value of the SAP call, and I'm going to get it to generate the ID for me in the database and map the customer name and the full name across to whatever I'm using in my database. Next, it suggests that I call create customer, so that's actually going to create it in my database. And then finally, I loop back, and this is now a valid synchronization action. The last thing I need to do is I need to go and create a user interface. And in the interest of time, I'm going to take advantage of one of the OutSystems features, which just lets me drag an entity into my user interface layer, and it will create a master detail view of my application here. So this master screen will give me a list of my customers, and this is integrating into my customer table, not directly into the API, although we could certainly do that if we wanted to. The last thing I need to do is I've got to have some way of triggering that sync. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a button, which I'm going to call sync. And I'm going to, in that button, call that logic that I created. And I also need to then tell it, once the synchronization has been done, that it needs to refresh that table that I was just looking at. Right, now I'm ready to build my application. So I hit the green one-click publish button at the top. It will put my application under version control. It generates the underlying code. It generates the database table that I defined. And in a couple more seconds, it will be ready to execute in my development environment. So when I run this application, I can now see my customer list. Now I haven't synchronized the data, so I click on sync and the data comes in from SAP. It's paginated here, so I can go to different records. I can click on the detail and I can go back if necessary. So that's my first application. The last bit of the demo that I wanted to show you is building an offline mobile app now based on that. So if I go back to my screen here, I'm going to create yet another application, again from scratch, but this time I'm going to create a phone app. So this is going to be SAP offline phone app. Then let's put the logo on it. And you'll actually see as I go through the steps to build this application, even though I'm building a native iOS and Android application, that the environment that I use to build that is virtually identical to building a web application. Now I'm going to go in and search for, rather than that direct integration that I used previously, I'm actually going to be leveraging the customer table in that back office application that I just created. So now in my data layer here, I can see that table that I've synchronized out of SAP, and I'm going to drag that into local storage, which means I will set up the same schema locally on my mobile device. I now need to set up the synchronization logic. So this creates a synchronization flow for the customer table, and I will add that to my general flow here, which handles all of my data synchronization. I also need to tell OutSystems when to synchronize. So in this case, we're going to synchronize on login. The last thing I need to do here is to create a user interface. And again, I'm just going to take a bit of a shortcut. While we can create pixel perfect user interfaces, in the interest of time, I'm going to create a very simple user interface, which is just going to list out my customer data in a similar way to what I did in my mobile app. Again, I'm ready to publish. And likewise, it goes through exactly the same stages that we saw previously. We put the application under version control, generate all of the underlying code assets which use standard technologies, and then we'll have the application ready to run. When I run the application the first time, it will just load into a sample screen. Let me just try that again. Back onto here. Let me just try one more time. And we won't have any data in there because it actually hasn't done the synchronization function. I need to go through the login in order for that to occur. And now it's synchronized the data into my mobile app. The very last thing I want to highlight is how can we then generate the actual application that I want to put into the App Store with it. We can actually distribute this application in three ways. One is as a progressive web app, and I can do that. It's as simple as ticking this box. So this can be now accessed as a progressive web app. I could also launch this button here, which will go off to a cloud service to generate the Android app. This takes about 5 minutes to generate the APK file, which I can then test and submit to the App Store. And I can do the same thing for my iOS version of the application. All right, I will finish up now and hand back to Hans. I hope you enjoyed the demo.
You look like a chef in a kitchen, you know, with putting together all the different elements in such a short time. So I really appreciate it. We have just 3 minutes to go. So I would like to open up for any questions anybody could have. Based on the demo, based on the introduction that Pedro gave on where to start and how to start, feel free to share any questions that you have with us. And I'm sure that my colleagues will be more than happy to answer them. Anybody that wants to, you can use the chat if you want to, or the Q&A. All right, so far no questions here. One of the things that struck me in the demo is the tremendous ability to reuse certain components. You've been doing this for a long time, Richard. When you look at the productivity of your teams, I see a question here, by the way, but just to finish that last question, what types of productivity are you looking at in terms of your experience?
So in the teams that we have in our professional services, we generally estimate for a 4 to 5 times increase in the overall productivity. And that's not just around the build, it's also around the maintenance of the application, release management, all of those kinds of aspects, which are also managed by the platform. I should also mention, obviously, the demo is only 15 minutes, and you're more than welcome to set up a further session and explore this in more detail if you like. But the productivity increase that you saw there really does translate into real world applications.
Yeah. There's a question from Arif. How does the debugging happen? So either Pedro, Richard, or Chris.
I'm happy to answer that. There's an embedded debug that allows you to debug all the APIs up to the call method, including security parameters that are passed. And it's we mentioned OutSystems is a full stack platform, so pretty complete when it comes to custom development. Yeah. Great question. Thank you.
Collectively writing a novel, but within the boundaries and let's say the rule setting that the platform delivers, which includes the debugging and the security and so forth. Right. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? Right. Then we have 1 minute to go. So I'd like to finish up here with let's say the summary of what the value of the platform can deliver, right? Customer experience transformation, real game changer. Second of all, workplace innovation towards your internal audiences. Thirdly, the example that I gave you from this big beverage company, process automation, and in the context of this SAP broadcast application modernization for your old instances of SAP. With that, I would like to ask from the perspective of you, Pedro, is there any follow-up step that could be taken should anybody in this webcast be interested to continue this conversation?
Absolutely, thank you. And we saw Richard doing a demonstration in 15 minutes, building a mobile app from scratch, a web app, and connecting to SAP for one entity. There's a lot more to explore, especially when you already have your SAP APIs exposed or not, and you want to connect. So we would like to propose more depth of conversation and actually show you under the bonnet more with a complementary OutSystems workshop also. So the offer is there. We're very passionate about these topics because we see organizations with real improvements and benefits for their users. And so reach out to any of us for more information.
Perfect. So there's this complementary exploratory workshop that can be tailored to your individual company's needs. And secondly, from my perspective, recently OutSystems has hired me to write 4 extensive client cases, which I'll share with you right here. So these are also inputs that you could take to make up your mind if this route could be useful to you. Thank you to you, first of all, Chris, for your client case, for you, Pedro, for you, Richard, for the demo, Simon on the back end, as well as Matthew. It was great to have you all together. Thank you for taking the time and staying for the whole course. I hope to see you in the future, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.